Good morning, church family. Get rid of the stand real fast. I don't want anything competing for my space up here. Oh, it's good to be back. I missed being up here last week. I enjoy being able to have a week off from time to time, but I'm realizing the older I get, I might start having what is called in the preacher world pulpit envy. That if someone else is up here preaching, I'm like, oh, hold on, that's my space. It's not. Lanny did a great job, and honestly, I'm super glad to hand it off to Lanny and be able to talk about all the wonderful things Eastern European Missions is doing. That was harder to say than it was intended to. But a lot of great stuff, and I'm super excited that we are partnering with them along with all of our other mission efforts, which if you don't know about that, then go watch the recording from last week. I mean, we covered a lot of it there. Or if you have any questions with any of our missions, you can talk to Steve Prock or Marcus Olds, and they would love to talk to you more about it as how you can get involved specifically, individually, in any way. They are always looking for more help and willing bodies in any kind of effort that they're doing, not just financial resources. Because we believe here that it is not just enough to have these ideas that we support, but to truly lean in and do as much as we can. And so that's kind of where our DNA is pushing us at Western Heights, is to lean in and do as much that we can. I'm glad for those of you joining us online. I know that it is not always easy to join in whenever you are distant, but we are glad. It might be convenient, but it's not always easy. And so we're glad that you are here wherever life may find you in this moment. We are glad that you are worshiping with us this morning. This morning we are starting a new series called Against the Flow. And some of you may realize, some of you may already know that we are living in a culture that is increasingly apathetic and sometimes even hostile to the beliefs and lives of Christians. Like in our community, I feel like we live in a really good community. I realize this, I don't have to go anywhere in this community and hide that I'm a preacher. Now, that may sound weird to you, but there's a lot of communities that whenever I go in and I tell them that I'm a preacher, they don't want to talk to me anymore. They're like, oh, and they put me in this little category, in this box, and they don't want to talk to me. That may be the same for you whenever you tell people you're a Christian. And we don't live in one of those communities, thankfully. But I can still say without any hesitation that we do live in a community that is increasingly more apathetic to Christian values and beliefs. And one day it might be increasingly hostile. So this is the world we live in. We don't have to look very far past our community to see this. You can look in the news media, and you'll definitely see this, right? You'll see it all over the news media. You can look on social media, and you'll see we live in a world that seems to be going the just complete opposite direction of what Christians should be doing. And that's the world that we've been called into. So how do we hold on to our godly principles in an increasingly ungodly culture? How do we do that? That's a question that we need to keep on asking ourselves daily, of how are we going to live holding on to our godly principles in an ungodly world and without coming across as a bunch of obnoxious jerks. Because that probably is the kicker. Is we can live countercultural and no one wants to join us. But that's not the call of Christ. The call of Christ is to live countercultural and to call others to Him. And so lucky for us, this is not a new question. This is not a new thing that God followers have had to deal with. In fact, it's a very ancient question, one that was answered in an Old Testament story in the book of the story of a man that bears, the title of the book bears his name, Daniel. We're going to embark in this new study in the book of Daniel, but it's more so in the life of Daniel. And some of you who have read the book of Daniel, you know that the first half of it is awesome. The second half of it is awesome as well, but in a very different way, all right? It's apocalyptic literature, and it's weird, and it's crazy. We'll see how we deal with that whenever we get there. Let's just start with the amazing story of Daniel and what we can glean from this. And so the book of Daniel starts off like this. During the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylonia. He placed them in the treasure house of his God. So the setting of the book of Daniel starts with the Babylonians being used as God's instrument to punish the Israelites living in Judah for their lack of obedience. Verses 1 and 2 want it to be very clear, especially verse 2. The Lord gave him victory. The Lord was working this. The Lord sent the Babylonians. King Nebuchadnezzar is God's pawn in this chess game. All right? So the book of Daniel wants us to see this. The Babylonians conquer. They conquered Judah, and in the following years, they have 3 different deportations of the Israelites. The first one is where they take Daniel and his friends. About 10 years later, they take Ezekiel and his friends. And then about 10 years later, Israelites are still kind of pushing back quite a bit, and so he comes through and just wipes out Jerusalem and takes out most everyone else that's left and brings them into captivity. Brings them into exile. And so 3 different deportations that are going to happen through the story of the book of Daniel, but we're really just going to focus on his story. But the thing is that you do not want to miss, this is God's plan, not just by what Daniel said, but years before Daniel, there was a prophet named Isaiah that said this, Isaiah 39, 5-7. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, listen to the message from the Lord of heaven's armies. The time is coming when everything in your palace, all the treasures stored up by your ancestors until now, will be carried off to Babylon. Babylon wasn't even an empire at this time. Babylon wasn't a threat to anybody, but Isaiah is saying there will be a day when the Babylonians are going to come in, they're going to carry off all the treasure. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. Some of your very own sons will be taken into exile. They will become eunuchs who will serve in the palace of Babylon's king. Isaiah is talking about Daniel and his friends. And so let's pick up the story in Daniel. Daniel chapter 1, verse 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning and gifted with knowledge and good judgment and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and the literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them these Babylonian names. Daniel was given the name Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. That is a story that we know, it's one of those, whenever you hear those names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you're like, oh, I remember these guys. Daniel, oh, I remember Daniel in the lion's den, and I remember a couple other things with Daniel. All of that started, as we see, by King Nebuchadnezzar taking these young men into captivity. I want you to consider a few things. What King Nebuchadnezzar is doing. Whenever he goes into a nation, he already conquers the nation. He wipes out the army. He goes through and parades in the streets. He takes out the household gods of that place to say, I am a bigger God than any God that you worship. That's what he's saying when he comes through and takes all the sacred objects out of the temple. And then, if that isn't enough, he takes the next generation's best and brightest. He takes the best-looking, smartest young men of the kingdom that he conquered, and he brings them back to assimilate them in Babylonian culture. So not only is Nebuchadnezzar conquering a nation, he is also trying to conquer the next generation. That's what's happening. And it's very successful in most of the lands that he conquers. Because what happens is they come back and they're treated like royalty in an empire that is growing, that didn't get defeated. They're treated well because Nebuchadnezzar knows you win the next generation and you've got them forever. Boy, there's a lesson in there for us, isn't there? I tell you what, Satan is working hard to win the next generation because he knows if he wins them, he wins the game. Not the ultimate game, obviously. We know that, okay? I'm not talking about that. He wins us. We will be no more if we allow Satan to have the next generation. That's a scary thought. And that's one of the reasons I want to dive into the book of Daniel. Is because Daniel shows us how to live in a world that is trying to pick off the next generation. He shows us what we can do when we are living in Babylon. But I want you to put yourself in Daniel's place. Put yourself in his sandals for a bit. By no fault of his own, he was taken into captivity. He didn't do anything wrong. In fact, the story kind of seems that he isn't even old enough to do anything wrong. It's not his fault that the Lord is punishing the Israelites. He didn't do anything wrong. He gets taken into captivity. His name is changed from Daniel, which means God will judge, to Belteshazzar, which means Baal will protect. What a name change. The God that conquered him, his name is now, that God will protect you. That's not some psychosomatic stuff going on in Daniel that he has to deal with, but that's not the biggest indignity. Isaiah prophesies that they will become eunuchs. That is actually a pretty common theme, common practice in those days. If you're going to serve in the king's house, you're not going to mess with any of his wives. So they would castrate the men. So, this is probably one of the reasons why you never read of Daniel and his friends having families, is because this is what happened. So by no fault of your own, you're taken captivity to a foreign land. You are deprived of being a father and having a family. Would you be bitter? How would you feel if you were in Daniel's place in that moment? I think Daniel would have every right, according to our understanding, to be angry. He could be angry with his ancestors. It's because them that God is judging now. Isaiah prophesied to this. He could be angry with the Babylonians because they're coming in and affecting this plan, doing all this stuff to him. He could even be angry with God, couldn't he? Because if he understands that God is behind all of this, then he would have every right in our thinking to be angry and upset and bitter. But one of the most fascinating things about the book of Daniel is how positive, uplifting, and encouraging Daniel is throughout the whole thing. Every turn that happens, every time adversity comes his way, he is calm, he is positive, and he is effective. And he has, in our human understanding, no right to be. Nothing in his life would point him to this wonderful enthusiasm that we kind of see. It's a choice that he makes, and it has ripples for generations. How are we going to navigate a world that doesn't have the same values as we do? How is that going to be a part of our thing? See, Daniel is going to spend the rest of his life faithful in his service to God. He's going to be helpful to his friends, and he's going to serve his government well. Not a government of his choosing then, but he's still going to serve it well. I'm going to repeat this phrase throughout this whole series, but I wanted you to catch it right now. Daniel served God in Babylon, and Daniel served Babylon for God. This is going to be the secret sauce recipe for us to understand. what we need to be understanding as we live in our modern day Babylon is that we can still serve God in Babylon. Whatever Babylon looks like now, Babylon throughout Scripture is just meant to help us understand empires that are against God, that are not doing what God desires in everything that they do. I think there's pretty much every empire of this world falls into that category. And as much as it pains me to say this, the one you live in falls into this category. You live in a modern day Babylon. You can still serve God in Babylon, and you can also serve Babylon for God. Daniel shows us how this works. He shows us how to navigate in this culture that doesn't endorse our values. Traditionally, though, we've gone with 3 responses on how to respond to a culture that doesn't uphold our values. We usually have gone into one of 3 categories. The first one is that we've kind of pulled away from culture. Kind of think of like maybe the Amish and how they've done things. There's a few other groups that have done this, that instead of engaging in any of the culture, they kind of sequester themselves, kind of build some walls, whether they're true walls, heading out into Utah, or other kinds of walls of just getting away and saying nothing here from culture. We don't want to be influenced by, and so our best way to respond to a culture that doesn't agree with us is to just pull away from them. That's response number 1, and a lot of Christians have done that. And it's not just Christian groups, it's Christian individuals have done this as well. Individuals have pulled away from the culture and has still worshiped in the churches and done all the things, but they've pulled away from the culture to not engage any of it. Option 2, though, is those who have they haven't just pulled away, they have actually pushed back to culture. Maybe think West Freeway Baptist got really popular for this for a time, but it's the picket signs. It's coming out and protesting. Culture is going one way, and then you have a group of Christians that say, no, culture should not go that way. So they stand out there proclaiming their values and trying to impose them on people who don't have the same value set. They don't even have the same standing to even have close to the same value set. And so some will be in the picket lines. Some will be in the protests. Some respond to culture that doesn't agree with them by pushing back. The third option, instead of pulling away or pushing back, some people have said, you know what? I don't really like either of those options. I'm just going to go with the flow. I'm going to water down the message so that it doesn't ripple affect my life. I'm not just going to pull away and I'm not going to push back. I'm just going to see where culture's going and I'm going to adopt it. I'm going to baptize it a little bit by saying, well, you know what? Culture does this. It's not quite right, so we're going to do this that's close, and it's going to make us look like culture, but we're really not because we're still proclaiming Christ. I'm going to just tell you all 3 of those options. Pulling back, or pulling away, pushing back, or going with the flow. None of those options are good. None of those options is what God desires from His people. Daniel will show us another option. Daniel will show us how we can serve God in Babylon and serve Babylon for God. So I'm going to read the next section. It's a lengthy section. And instead of it being on the screen, you can either pull up your own Bible and follow along, or you can just listen. Because sometimes I understand that some people catch more just by listening. And so feel free, if you want to follow along, pull up your Bible, swipe wherever that might be, and we'll go from there. Daniel 1, starting verse 8. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel, but he responded, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat the food and the wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I'm afraid the king will have me beheaded. Daniel spoke with the attendant who had been appointed to the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water. This is probably the only recorded time that youths have asked for vegetables, but it's here, it's recorded. Verse 12, So verse 13, at the end of 10 days, see how we look compared to other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make a decision in light of what you see. The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of the food and wine provided for the others. God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. When the training period ordered by the king was completed, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. When the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained in the royal service until the first year of the reign of King Cyrus. First off, never cease to be amazed of what the younger generation can do for the glory of God. Never cease to be amazed. I think we do a huge disservice whenever we consider the younger generation simply the future of the church. Yeah, they're the future of the church, but they also better be our present. Because sometimes that present is going to put us to shame whenever we look at their stories and we look at their faithfulness in the adversity that they deal with every day that youths should not have to deal with. Daniel and his friends should not have to deal with this, but they dealt with it in such a way that it changed how a nation would respond to the Babylon that they're in. All because 4 young men would choose to be faithful. Never underestimate the power of faithfulness, no matter the age, no matter anything, any box that we try to put someone in. It doesn't matter their gender, it doesn't matter their race, it doesn't matter their socioeconomic status, it doesn't matter. When they are faithful, it is an impressive thing. So I have 3 things that I've gleaned from this story that I want to share with you. First off is this: choose battles that really matter. As Christians, we like to debate. Maybe this is just a byproduct of years gone past, but we do like to be right. Especially in our heritage and our culture, we have kind of based a lot of our understanding on that we are right in our interpretation and our understanding of Scripture, that we're right in this, and we put so many things that we want to be right that anytime we see something that isn't quite right or is clearly wrong, we want to challenge it. We want to push back. We want to be and seen as being right. Notice what Daniel doesn't. Let's start off by this, what he doesn't battle. Daniel doesn't protest changing his name. His name was a godly name to him, and now he was given a pagan god's name. He doesn't protest. You don't see him going, oh, I'm not going to go by that name. That's just blasphemous. No, he doesn't protest this. He doesn't refuse to learn a new language. He doesn't skip the lessons even on dream interpretation. Something that was not acceptable in Israel. Something that was not according to the law in Israel. He doesn't skip those lessons. He doesn't treat his captors as enemies. He doesn't impose his values on them. He doesn't expect them to live like he does. These are all battles that he doesn't fight. There is a battle, though, that he chooses to fight, and this is fascinating. In all the things that he could have pushed back on, what he pushes back on is food. And what he refuses is the good stuff. I don't know how else to put it. They are given the choice meat and the choice drink that the king himself eats. This is literally offering the best the land has to offer to these young men. And they refuse it. Now that seems really strange. Seems really odd when you kind of think about it. You're like, why that battle? I mean, what point does that serve? Well, that may be because we're a little removed from how the king's food came about. We're a little removed from this. What happened is whenever the cooks would prepare the food for the king, the first thing that they would do is they would wave it in honor to the king's God. And then they would give it to the king to eat. And when you ate the king's meat, you showed that you were in fellowship and agreement with the king's gods. Food is important. Don't let anyone ever tell you differently. I mean, we know some potlucks. We're good at potlucks here, and it's important. And the reason it's important is not simply because of the food itself and what the food is. It's because of what we are telling people when we eat. Whenever I sit down to eat with someone, I'm telling them they are worth sitting down to eat with. I think they are worth it. I may not see eye to eye with everything that they say, but in that moment, I am in agreement with them. It's hard to fight with someone when your knees have been under the same table. It can happen, don't get me wrong. But never underestimate the power of food. Daniel didn't. He said, you can change my name. You can educate me about your God. You can do all these things to me. But I will not worship your God. And eating that food is an act of worship. I will not do it. We need to choose our battles wisely. Let's be honest for a moment. Christians have fought so many battles. We've had the worship wars. We have the battles about, when is the right time to have worship service and what all you should do in the worship service and who can do the things in a worship service. And then we have had other battles about, is this appropriate or not appropriate? And we have all these fights and these battles. And what we've honestly done is muddied the water for people to hear the good news. So many times we get so much into all these different issues that we have forgotten the issue at stake. It's their soul. Do they know Jesus? Now, I'm not saying that these other issues aren't important. What I'm saying is they ought to pale in comparison to the most important. We need to choose our battles wisely. We need to choose battles that really matter. Because if we lose on this, we will miss the point of everything. So choose battles that really matter. That's the first thing that I glean from Daniel and his story. The second thing is hold your convictions graciously. It's clear they had convictions. But notice, Daniel and his friends, when they take a stand, they do it without being rude. They do it without being obnoxious, disrespectful, or arrogant. This is a theme all throughout this book. They do all these things. They never rant, they never mock, they never whine. They hold their convictions clearly and strongly, but they hold their convictions without holding in contempt those who don't hold their same convictions. And that right there is a hard thing to do. To hold their convictions very strongly without holding in contempt someone who doesn't hold the same convictions as I do. That's a life lesson that we need to learn from Daniel. In fact, I'm kind of convinced that if Christians were more like Daniel, we would have a whole lot more converts. But what we end up doing is we hold our convictions like a hammer, ready to beat anyone who doesn't agree with us. Daniel asks for permission for him to continue holding to his convictions. You notice that? Here's my conviction. And he goes up the chain. He goes to the right power structure. He doesn't try to just hide it. He doesn't try to go around it. He goes straight to the one that's in charge of him, and he says, hey, look, here's my conviction. It is against my convictions to eat the meat and the wine. So would you allow me to eat vegetables and water, drink water? If the world saw Christians as being that gracious with our convictions, I think they would be like, oh, hold up. I'm afraid for my own life that I might lose my head with this, but let's talk about it for a moment. Because that's what happens. Now they have a conversation. Daniel says, hey, I think we can work this out. Let's try this. We need to hold our convictions gracefully, Paul would say in Romans 12:18, he says, if it is possible, as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with everyone. You know, I looked up that Greek word, everyone. It's a really interesting word. Do you know what it means, Greek? Everyone. Yeah, it does. Literally. It's an interesting word, though. It doesn't say to live at peace with the people that are like you. It doesn't say to live at peace with the people that agree with you. It doesn't even say to live at peace with people of your choosing. What it says is to live at peace with everyone. And how do you do that? Is you are gracious, especially with your convictions. It's not easy to do this in this world, but it is very much appreciated, and it is very effective in winning more souls. That's the second thing. Last thing that I gleaned from this, and then the lesson is yours. Trust the impact of an obedient life. Trust the impact of what God can do whenever you are obedient. People are not convicted by how loud we shout, but they are convicted with how we live, how well we live. Our Babylonian friends, they need to see that the way we live works. They need to see that the way we live, the way that we are walking through this life actually does work. And they do. Usually at the end of life, whenever someone dies, a good Christian dies and the Christian family surrounds them, but they have others that are not part of Christ. They look on that family and go, you guys are strange. You guys are rejoicing in your grief. That's weird. That's different. And you're like, yeah, it is, but it's a better way to live. Because we have a hope. And anyone that has hope has a better way to live. They don't care how much you shout. You can shout to your red or blue in the face. I don't care which way it takes you. But if you live well, that's what gets noticed. Daniel and his friends do this. Daniel asked the official, test this. Hey, put us on a vegetable and water diet. I'm not so sure about that because the king might have my head. He goes, hey, I got a way around that. Test my faithfulness. Test it. 10 days. That's all we need, 10 days. So the official's like, you know what? We got a 3-year training period. 10 days ain't going to hurt a thing. I can catch him up. If all else fails, I can catch him up. So he agrees. 10 days later, what he sees blows him away. It's not what he expected. Never underestimate the impact of a faithful, obedient life. When someone is truly holding to their convictions graciously, the impact is impeccable. The impact is impressive. We don't need to rant about the unrighteousness in this world. Rather, we need to live righteous to let people see that there's a better way to live. Social media has plenty of ranters, has plenty of people that are on there to just give their opinion and just be annoying. They don't need us to join in on that. What our Babylonian friends need is for us to live an obedient life and to show them that that life is blessed. Peter would pick up on this theme in 1 Peter 2, verse 11. He says, dear friends, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against your very souls. Same idea. Don't choose your battles wisely. Okay? Be careful to live properly among your unbelieving neighbors. Again, same idea. Hold your convictions graciously. Then, even if they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your honorable behavior and they will give honor to God when He judges the world. So again, number 3, trust the impact of an obedient life. Notice that by the end of the chapter, these 4 teenage boys or young men, they were able to serve the king better because they first honored another king. They were able to do their job, their secular job, better because they first honored the true king. We're in the same boat. The same lesson applies to us. We are not that far removed from Babylon. We are not that far removed from Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In fact, I think that their story is quite often our story. So when in Babylon, when we find ourselves in Babylon, may we have the kind of impact that these young men had. May we learn and grow into our service that we can serve God in Babylon, and we can serve Babylon for God. This morning, I don't know what the Spirit has been convicting you of, but I know that each one of us needs to get better in our service in the world so that we can honor the King of Kings of all the world. May we be the kind of impact that God desires. And if you need help in that, if you would like prayers in that journey, or if you would like to give your life to Christ this morning and begin or continue that journey with God, then we welcome you this morning to come as we stand and sing.